Thank you, Jody. My name is Billy Sinclair, and as Jody said, this book is really 42 years in the making, because it was in 1966 that I was convicted of capital murder, and some 7-8 months later was formally sentenced to death in the electric chair at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. So naturally I have an ingrained interest in the death penalty, have for many years. It was a subject of morbid interest for me while I was on death row, because I studied all the methods of execution, wanted to become familiar with how people are put to death by the state, and had a particular interest in the electric chair because that's what the mode of death that I faced. And so capital punishment has been an ongoing interest of mine. After I was released from death row in 1972, in later years, while in prison, I became a celebrated prison journalist and was the recipient of a number of prestigious journalism awards, including the George Polk, the Robert F. Kennedy, the Sidney Hillman, and the ABA Silver Gavel Awards. And I found it a common theme in the awards, for example, the Polk Award and the ABA Silver Gavel Award. Those awards were for death penalty related issues. Stories. So I've written extensively about the death penalty, and when I was released on parole in 2006, in April of 2006, going to work as a paralegal for a law firm, once again I encountered the death penalty as a paralegal in a criminal defense firm. So it's been sort of a life interest, and I guess it will be until the day I die. As a gentleman, he was introducing me a while ago, said, you know, the life without parole, because I was in 1972 re-sentenced to life without parole. In 1992, the governor of Louisiana commuted my life sentence to 90 years. And after 6 failed parole attempts, I was finally paroled, as I said, on the 7th attempt in April of 2006. Moved to Houston, where Jody lived, and had a start. Went to school, went to the community college here in Houston, got my skills brought up on Texas law. Already knew as a jailhouse lawyer in the Louisiana prison system, Louisiana law. So I had to bring my skills up to learn about Texas law and Texas criminal procedure in order to function as a paralegal, and I did that, and went to work in 2007 for the John T. Floyd law firm here in Houston. And that's what I've been doing since. In addition to working as a paralegal, I also post with John 2 blogs every week on his website. And a number of these blogs, once again, deal with the death penalty or some issue related to the death penalty. And in 2008, the Supreme Court dealt with the death penalty in 2 ways. First of all, it said that the three-drug protocol was constitutional, was not cruel and unusual punishment, and then they also said that the death penalty could not be imposed for offenders convicted of child rape. So our publishers felt that the death penalty was a real topical issue in the country, and Barack Obama, part of his campaign, his presidential campaign, was based upon his having reformed or worked toward the reform of the Illinois death penalty system. So it was sort of natural that this book would come to be. And we put together collections of essays and material that we had both been working on for a number of years. And together that's how the book came to pass. And I would make one final note about the book. We tried in this book, much like we did in our previous book, Life in the Balance, we tried to tell a story through human drama. We did not want to write a book that just simply analyzed the death penalty with statistics and facts and figures. We wanted to tell the death penalty through human stories, through the human drama of those stories, and we hope we achieved that objective.
I think when it comes to the death penalty, I became otherwise fascinated because the victims in my husband's case were so intensely devoted over the years to making certain that he was never released from prison and that he suffered the maximum punishment he could possibly suffer, and they felt terribly cheated because he had not been put to death. And so for 25 years, over and over again, my hopes, I married Billy by proxy and waited 25 years for him to come home. I really began to wonder, well, where does the death penalty come from? Why are we so devoted to it? Why do people feel so cheated when there is a crime? Why is there such a push for the death penalty? And I finally decided, and that's why I call the first chapter the justice gene, I finally decided the desire has to be in the genes. It would almost have to be in the genes for it to be that intense and that ongoing. And so I'll just briefly read from this because I subsequently found in the New York Times and other articles in the lay literature about the way the brain works after, the decade of the 1990s said to be the decade of the brain, because with an MRI you could look in the brain without cracking it open and see what was going on as people were thinking. So millions of years before recorded history, our small ape-like ancestors stood up on their hind legs and began to struggle to survive on the African veldt, virtually defenseless in a vicious place for which they had abandoned the safety of the trees. In the fossil record over the long evolutionary march toward Homo sapiens, their bones and those of their descendants reveal the physical changes that resulted in us. Upright creatures with bigger frames, longer bones, and larger brains. But the fossil record reveals little about the thoughts and emotions that coursed through their brains as our ancestors made the long, gradual trek toward modern man. So we must wonder then, whence comes the common mindset that governs our behavior? Science suggests that it evolved in a setting that demanded social cooperation for survival. Imagine a group of hominids. One of its members has eaten more than its fair share of the group's food. Now watch the group as a whole, brutally assaulting the offender, possibly beating it to death. In a place and time where food was scarce and life itself was risked to gather it, the entire group might die of starvation if the behavior of the offender went unchecked. Such a scene resonates with us, and we easily understand the need for this punishment. And so as I began to read over time, I began to understand, and the social science seemed to back it up, that that punishment or the desire for revenge, whichever way, justice, is rooted in altruism, which was a strange thing for me to think about. But that is why it is so strong. And it's also been noted by these MRI studies of the brain engaging in altruistic behavior, that the pleasure centers of the brain light up when we engage in altruistic behavior that benefits the group. But those are the same brain centers that light up when you take drugs. And so I began to think that you could become addicted to the desire to punish. And therefore, that becomes strongly rooted in us, and out of that arises torture and some of the other behavior that we see. So that's why the first chapter of this book, and there are other issues in the first chapter that have to deal with the modes and methods of execution, some of which are exceedingly gruesome. And I also have to smile to myself because this has been a topic of public debate for some years now. Do we as Americans, do we torture? And of course that was with respect to Abu Ghraib and so forth in the Bush administration. And now we have a new president and a new perspective on that potentially. But I would always think to myself, because of the death penalty, yes, we torture. Yes, we do torture other human beings. But people don't think of it in that regard. But quite frankly, and this is just very brief, on page 228, in 2004, Alabama executed a 74-year-old man who suffered from dementia and colon and prostate cancer and was so weak that fellow inmates had to walk him to the shower and comb his hair.